Afternoon everyone, my name is Ben Norfolk and we're here today to have a quick look at my Sprint Mini. We haven't got a lot of time, so I'll sort of get straight into it. I had the car since I was 17, so about 26-ish years or so, and I started racing her in early 2000 once I joined the military, and then went on to race with varying degrees of success for the next 15 years on and off between deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was during one of the later deployments that I went on to in Afghanistan that an event that caused me a lot of problems, and it was through the course of that the increasing problems that I started to have with my mental health started to impact on my motorsport. And weirdly enough, it was my last races towards the end of 2015 that I really started to struggle with anxiety and depression about making sure I could get to my races on time, that the car wouldn't break, that I didn't have any problems with it or anything like that. And that was really the trigger for me that got me into therapy and treatment and all these sorts of things, and also led me to get involved with Mission Motorsport. And this is one of the slots during this weekend that we're very grateful to be able to have, to be able to share the work that Mission Motorsport does and the people who are involved in it. Now, as I say, I've been racing a car for sort of on and off for over 15 years, and during the time that I stopped racing and started to have lots of problems, that the car became an analogy for my illness. So I started to break the car into pieces and try and rebuild it to make it even better than it was before. And during the course of that, I've amassed lots of tools and equipment, and taught myself a lot of ways to basically try and make the car as good as it could possibly be. I had help with some of the tools in terms of they were sourced through a contact with Mission Motorsport, and help from SAFA to be able to have these tools for my first job post-injury, which was restoring vintage Bentleys with William Metcalf, which was a fantastic opportunity. As I say, lots of other bits of kit for me to be self-sufficient to get the car as good as I want it to be, and I've got very sort of exacting standards with it, as hopefully I'll be able to get across. So as well as the lathe and all the tooling, I've taught myself to TIG weld to be able to do everything that I need to do. And so without further ado, let's have a quick look at the car. And here she is. This is Sophie, named after a 12-year-old kid who, or named by a 12-year-old kid rather, who decided that it being called a Mini wasn't quite enough, and there she is. So without further ado, let's take a bit of a dive in. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the noisy end of the car. Before I start, I touched on it a bit earlier about this car being sort of a constant evolution of when my mental health was breaking down, that I broke this car down, and that as I am trying to rebuild myself, that I'm doing the same with the car at the same time. So in many senses, I'm showing you me. There's like an analogy between the two things. So it's actually quite hard for me to show you the car that isn't quite finished yet. So sort of, bear that in mind. I know there's a lot of people use their garages and their cars or whatever else for their own sort of personal sort of therapy, if you like, and this is mine. So I thought it's sort of important to acknowledge that, bearing in mind really what this weekend is about. It's about looking at nice cars, but it's also about the effect that those cars have on us, and our sort of mental health. So without further ado, let's dive in. Still an A series engine. This is actually an A plus from a Metro, slightly stronger than the older sort of original sort of Mini A series block. It's been bored out to 1380 from the 1275 it started off as. It's sitting in a rather nice titanium front subframe, which is in no means standard in wallet or in weight. Probably saves around sort of about 12 kilos over the standard steel subframe. I've also got titanium suspension on it as well, for that unsprung weight is fantastic, as well as alloy uprights and bits and pieces like that. For those who know your A series and minis, you'll notice that the distributor is missing. That's because, as before, she was switched over to an ignition only engine management system, which means you don't need the distributor. To be able to run an engine management system like that, or the very basic version of it, you need two things. You need an engine speed signal, and you also need a engine load. So we've got down here, just use my little rod end pointer, this is what's called the VR sensor, and that measures engine speed at the crank. And then coming round over the top, we've got load, which in this case is from a throttle position sensor. So when I put my foot on the accelerator, down the bottom here, you'll see that's converted into an electrical signal, which then allows a map, an engine map, to be created for ignition timing, to be able to get the engine running as smoothly as possible. Fueling is still done by, in this case, a 45 Weber, which drinks fuel. I'm probably on about 9 miles to gallon in this when I'm racing, which is fine. Also, ignition comes from a coil pack. This is like an old Ford system, and it used a wasted spark system that provides a spark rather than, say, the distributor that was there before. Again, for some of you sort of mini enthusiasts, normally there are two master cylinders here. This one is for front and rear brakes. Normally there is another one here where these two bolts are. That is for the clutch master cylinder. When I went to do my first race in 2001, I was supposed to be at Gerston Down, and the night before this very first race, I blew up the slave cylinder, and it sprayed brake fluid all over my freshly painted wings, which really sucked. So it didn't take me long after they were invented to be able to move to a pedal-based, it's like a push rod system, which basically when I move the push rod, it moves the clutch arm out and works that way. It's more direct. I don't have other things to brake. It's solid, so it's reliable. It doesn't affect any racing at all. Moved away because of the subframe that I've got. I don't have the rubber donuts for springs, which are normally sort of nestled in there somewhere. I've gone to coilover dampers all round. These are rather lovely quantum ones, fully adjustable for height and damping, which is great. It means you can really tune what is already very good suspension in. I mentioned before about titanium top and bottom arms. Took a little bit of fettling to be able to get the positions right for the upper suspension arms, which is all good, but it's all about getting it right now. And then down the bottom here, some of you will notice I've got what are called ball joint droppers. One of the problems with lowering any car is your roll centre moves away from the centre of the mass of the car. So as a result, you end up getting a reduction in roll stiffness. Means the car is going to wallow around, and that's just not acceptable on a Mini. The ball joint droppers help to bring the centre of mass and roll centre back together again, or at least closer, and basically just stops the car sort of pivoting and rolling around itself. So there we go, that is the front end of the car. Nice and light, sort of quite expensive and still with a sort of a lot to do. But that's basically it. So now we'll move on to the inside the cockpit. The cockpit now. So this shell has been built up from. It was basically chopped to pieces. It was like one of the biggest sort of like cathartic events that I did was chopping the old roll cage out, which I'd welded, bent, notched everything. I'd done it all myself. Chopped all that out, and I took it down to a company called Right Line down in Kent, who put a proper, it's pretty much Miglia spec cage in, which is a little bit heavier but a lot safer. There are a few other bits and pieces that if I was going to do like a full circuit racing season, a couple of extra bars I'd put in, but they are pretty much like one of the safest cages out there for a small car like this. A lot of times they have big crashes and the cages are fine and they just replace the shell around the outside of it. So it's that was safe enough for me. So as you can see, it's full multi-point caging. It's tied in a lot of places to around the cage, to around the shell rather, all the way around the back with the roll hoop. We've got bars that go back through the rear bulkhead down to the rear suspension arms for to be able to help with making the car, taking advantage of all this extra weight and making it nice and stiff as well. Down to small sort of box sections where it all mounts, just to try and spread that load out a little bit more. Sticking with the safety stuff, fire extinguishers in. That's an aluminium one, so it saves a little bit of weight rather. It's all about adding lightness, as Colin Chapman once said. And then I've still got the electrical side of that to do, which I'll come on to in a minute. We've got the battery down at the front, trying to keep, rather than balancing the weight of the car, I'm trying to get more weight over the driven wheels as I can, the front wheels, so I can get the back to move and do a lot more of the steering. That's the sort of plan. And then down sort of a little bit more like cockpit related stuff. I brought the gear selector box inside to be able to make more room for the exhaust. Really, obviously got a big sort of 2-inch system that goes through the back. And off the back of that, I sort of decided to mount this as like a membrane panel for all the switches. Basically, take care of everything on there. I can light it up, I can change how it works, fully sort of modified and things like that. Takes me back to my British GT racing days, but having membrane panels and all the posh stuff. So I thought it was my one throwback to that, which I'd keep. And then moving up this way, keeping with the lightness side of things, I only just bought this week. It's an OMP removable steering wheel mount, which is bloody fantastic and weighs absolutely nothing, which we absolutely love. And then on here we've got some control switches for the dash panel. This is a Race Technology dash, which has got everything on it. It takes all the feeds from the ECU, OMX ECU, once that's all fitted and wired up, and will give me all the information that I need with shift lights and everything else in between. Obviously, all this electronic stuff comes at a bit of a cost, and wiring is it. So I've got a lot of, as you might have seen from the first clip, a lot of plugs which I'm wiring up to do. A lot of this side of things I can do. One of the bits that I'm struggling with that I've found since my injury has been sort of cognitive ability, if you like. For some reason that seems to have gone, and wiring seems to be the thing that it just seems to completely sort of evade me being able to do it. I can do everything else, but wiring is the sort of the big thing that I'm struggling with, and it's holding the build back in all honesty. Yeah, if anyone knows the sort of ways around sort of electronic motorsport wiring side of things, then I'd absolutely love to hear from you. As I say, I can put all the plugs together, but the actual wiring itself, that's a problem that I need to get over. Okay, now down the back end of the car, I've got Macrolon polycarb windows, quite a lot of lightness there. Got a rain light if I want to go do a bit of circuit racing, which is partly the plan. And I've got some fiberglass on the back at the minute, but that's all going to be replaced with some rather nice carbon weave stuff to match the bumper and the other bits and pieces as well. Looking inside, nice small fuel tank for sprinting. I probably use about half of that per run, and a nice fuel pump as well. Looking at the back there, the arches have been what are called tubbed and turreted to give the wheels a little bit more room, and also the suspension. And as you mentioned before about the roll cage tying in with the back of that, just helps with that stiffness a little bit more. Moving underneath the car, we've got an anti-roll bar, just because everyone likes to lift an inside wheel. No other reason, obviously. And more quantum suspension and some rather nice CNC machined aluminium radius arms for a nice light beam axle at the back, which probably saves me a good sort of 20 or 30 kilos over a standard subframe setup. and that is pretty much it, other than hopefully all of that underneath will be covered by possibly this rear diffuser which I built. We'll see whether that actually works out. So there you go, that's my Sprint Mini, and by virtue of it being that car, me as well. Hope you enjoyed it. If you see any of the bits on the car that you think, well, why didn't you do it this way, when by all means let me know. I'm more than happy to sort of take advice from people and all that sort of stuff. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thanks.